Good evening, I'm James Brierton for the Carolina Weather Group, and welcome to live coverage of NASA's SpaceX Crew-6 returning to Earth. What you're looking at right here is a live heads-up display of our control room. We have NASA TV, we have coverage from SpaceX, we have raw feeds from the International Space Station, including crew communication aboard the Dragon capsule, which just moments before this 11 o'clock Eastern hour got the go-ahead from Houston. They are go for splashdown off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida, come 12:17 a.m. Eastern time, a little more than about an hour and 15 minutes from now. Do let me know in the comments as you're watching along with us here on YouTube if you have any trouble hearing me, if you have any problem hearing anything else. This is going to be a watch-along experience, and I'm so glad you are here to join me in tonight's experience because I'm going to take you behind the scenes of my NASA social event. NASA across the country holds these events that they invite people down for, whether they be social media influencers or content creators. And they invited the Carolina Weather Group. They invited me down at the beginning of the year for this launch, for the Crew-6 launch. And we spent 3 days there at Kennedy Space Center along the Space Coast, getting to go behind the scenes of Kennedy, learning what goes into a launch like this one in partnership with SpaceX, and also all that goes on at Kennedy Space Center to prepare for Artemis. So we're going to be listening in throughout the night. I'm also going to be showing you behind the scenes footage from Kennedy Space Center that you won't see on any of the other feeds tonight. So this is really the best place to get a little bit of everything. I know you want to hear right now how they're beginning their broadcasts. We're going to dip in, take a short listen, and I'll be back with you here in a few minutes as we continue to watch along as we prepare for 4 astronauts, 2 Americans, 1 from United Arab Emirates and 1 from Russia to return home in the course of the next few hours. Let's take a listen as NASA and SpaceX begin their coverage.
Me today from NASA Communications is Gary Jordan.
Hey, great to be here, Kate. This is an awesome day for Splashdown. So upon departing the station, Dragon underwent a sequence of departure burns. The crew had a rest period and has since kicked off preparations for re-entry, including getting in their launch and re-entry suits and successfully performing a leak check. The next phase of the mission is when these things really ramp up. Dragon has a series of steps to complete before returning Crew-6 home.
First, Dragon will maneuver to the correct attitude and jettison its trunk, which is the cylindrical, unpressurized part of the spacecraft. The trunk is currently connected to the aft or the bottom section of the Dragon capsule where the heat shield is located. So, in order to expose the heat shield and get the vehicle ready for atmospheric entry, we'll jettison that trunk.
And from there, the spacecraft will use its forward thrusters to perform a deorbit burn, which will put Dragon on a trajectory to return to Earth. This burn will last 16 minutes once it starts. The deorbit burn uses Draco thrusters on Dragon, primarily the 4 located on the forward bulkhead, and is executed at the apogee or the highest point of Dragon's current orbit around the Earth. This will alter Dragon's path to ultimately line it up to re-enter Earth's atmosphere.
As you can see from that graphic there on your screen, it should be pretty visible, especially if you are in Florida. So head outside and take a look up. It's an incredible sight, especially for these nighttime splashdowns. But before we go any further, let's take a minute to meet our crew.
That's right. On board, starting with our captain, is Steve Bowen, who hails from Cohasset, Massachusetts, and is married with 3 children. He holds the title of the first U.S. Navy submarine officer to be selected as a mission specialist by NASA. Bowen is also a veteran of 3 previous NASA space flights, including space shuttle flights on STS-126, 132, and 133. During those missions, he and his crew expanded the living quarters on the International Space Station, delivered an integrated cargo carrier, and a Russian mini-research module. With this mission, he now has logged 227 days in space, including 65 hours and 57 minutes in 10 spacewalks. Today, he is the commander of Crew-6.
Sitting next to
Dragon SpaceX, preemptively, we are 11 minutes out from deorbit sequence start and expect to be LOS during CLOSEP prep.
Expect to be LOS during CLOSEP prep.
You're listening in.
All right, those
radio
comms from SpaceX Core to Dragon Endeavour, just letting the crew know that we will have a loss of signal while we are performing the claw separation, which we mentioned that earlier is one of the steps for deorbit, but that deorbit burn coming up soon. Now, getting back to the crew on board, sitting next to Stephen is pilot Warren Woody Hoburg. The 37-year-old is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He studied aeronautics and astronautics from MIT before getting a doctorate in electrical engineering and computer computer science from University of California, Berkeley. During grad school, Hoburg worked as an EMT with the Yosemite Search and Rescue. Crew-6 has been Hoburg's first flight since NASA selected him to be an astronaut in 2017. He is also a commercial pilot with instrument, single-engine, and multi-engine ratings. As pilot for Crew-6, he is responsible for spacecraft systems and performance. Aboard the station, he served as an Expedition 68 and 69 flight engineer and is coming home with 186 days in space and 11 hours, 38 minutes of time outside the hatch on 2 spacewalks.
In the role of mission specialist is astronaut Sultan Alneyadi. He was chosen by the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center of the United Arab Emirates to be a part of Expedition 68 and 69. The father of 5 spent most of his life in Al Ain and Abu Dhabi, but in 2020 traded that in for astronaut training in Houston at NASA's Johnson Space Center. This has been his first trip to space, so he also now has 186 days in orbit. Additionally, he went on 1 spacewalk, totaling 7 hours and 1 minute.
It was also the first trip to space for the second mission specialist, Roscosmos cosmonaut Andrey Fedyaev. Andrey was selected as a cosmonaut back in 2012. He will monitor the spacecraft during the dynamic re-entry phase of flight. While on board station, he served as a flight engineer for Expeditions 68 and 69 and returns today also with 106 80 days in space. Now, to prepare for upcoming events, the Dragon spacecraft is currently doing a couple of things autonomously. It's isolating the thermal control system fluid loops from the radiator. This system is what will help keep the internal temperature of Dragon very temperate for Stephen, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey during the re-entry phase. Dragon is also initiating separation of the claw mechanism, which will terminate data, power, and fluid connections between the capsule and the trunk.
And that trunk separation, the Dragon has.
All right, we will get you back over to NASA SpaceX coverage in just a few minutes. Again, this is an interactive stream. This is almost a town hall event, if you will. We're going to be taking you through a little bit of what NASA and SpaceX are presenting, as well as some footage you won't see anywhere else that we were able to obtain here at the Carolina Weather Group when we went down to that NASA social event. So many of you are new to our channel, and I want to go ahead and take a time to get to know you a little bit better here over the course of the next few minutes. Dan, the breaking news man, I believe, is one of our newest subscribers. He's been checking out the Carolina Weather Group YouTube channel here, where we've been streaming live raw audio. We've been streaming the hatch closure and the undocking of this Crew-6. We've also been streaming the Crew-7 arrival, which happened just over a week or so ago, and we had that short handoff period. So, Dan, welcome to you. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Carolina Weather Group. We are a weekly show about weather, science, technology, and more, and space is the perfect marriage of those things because weather is so dependent on everything that happens in space. Douglas Banks watching with us tonight on YouTube. 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time is when we anticipate splashdown of this capsule off the Jacksonville, Florida coast. That's in the Atlantic Ocean, and that's going to be, obviously, for those of you who are in the United States, that is on our East Coast. So sometimes they land, or they splash down rather, in the Gulf. This time they're going to fly right over to Florida. They're going to fly over Tampa. So if you're in Tampa, Gainesville, Orlando, Palm Coast, Jacksonville, maybe even portions of our Georgia or South Carolina coast, you may be able to see what is essentially going to be a fireball in the sky tonight as we look ahead to the arrival of our crew in the next about hour or so. So we do appreciate all of you who are joining us. And let me talk a little bit about the NASA social event. You can actually see here for a moment before I get too far down, a live video inside. The crew they have those visors up. They will bring those visors down when they get a little bit closer. They're currently orbiting the planet. You can actually see they are on the sunward side of the planet right now as they prepare for their continuing deorbit and their splashdown in the next little bit. Why did it take longer to get to the International Space Station than to return it to Earth? Is gravity a factor? Well, Dan, you know, the one thing that always shocks me is how long it actually takes to get there, right? They left the International Space Station about 18 hours ago, 17, 18 hours ago. And it was the same thing when Crew-7 arrived, right? It takes almost a full day to get up there. You're right. There's a little bit of discrepancy, but it's a big chase. And I remember from when I went down to Kennedy Space Center in February for the launch, this is a launch that happens right at one launch time where it's not happening all. There's no window. They can't play catch up. And so the launch opportunity that I was at got scrubbed, as some of you may remember, because of a T-tap issue. So they had a hard time loading the propellant, and they actually had to come back a couple nights later because it's go at that moment or not go at all because of the way the orbits work. You can actually see some of the orbits on their touchscreen monitors there right now. This is live inside the Dragon capsule, which is currently, it appears, flying over portions of India and the Indian Ocean as it will continue to orbit the Earth. So, as I mentioned, I had a chance to go down to Kennedy Space Center and attend what's called a NASA social event. This is actually the credential. If you've been watching on our Carolina Weather Group live stream, you've actually seen our special episode that we put together. It's an hour long behind the scenes. And when I say behind the scenes, yes, I know there's a public tour of the Kennedy Space Center, but this is places where the tour doesn't get to go. We were escorted by NASA into some buildings and taken to places. We're going to show some of those clips here tonight. But if you want to get the full experience, it's on our YouTube channel. We've also been re-airing in anticipation of the crew's arrival back here on Earth, our live launch coverage that we were able to do down there. But despite the fact that we had all of this content to share with you over the course of the last 6 months that they've been up in space, there's actually one interview that we have yet to air because we just didn't have time for it anyplace. And it really helps me and you and all of us understand the importance of the International Space Station. It's been up there for so many years now. We take it for granted, but really it's a touchstone to what's to come. We have Artemis. And Artemis and the moon are going to get the gateway, which is essentially going to be a space station that orbits around the moon, which is going to help us learn how to live and develop technology on the moon so that one day we can get to Mars. Later on in our broadcast tonight, we're going to talk about the plants, the nutrition, the food that we're going to need someday to sustain human life well beyond the reaches of Earth and the moon as we someday hope to go to Mars. And that's what all of this is. It's building blocks. So the crew that is on their way home right now have been doing experiments up there to help us prepare for the moon and to Mars. And let's learn a little bit more about the evolution of what comes after the International Space Station gets decommissioned in the year 2030, and we look ahead to Gateway orbiting the moon. Here are some never before seen footage from my trip down to Kennedy Space Center in February.
I'm a guidance, navigation, and control expert, and I also do mission design. So what that means is people usually want to deliver something to the moon or to Mars or some other location throughout space, and I'm one of the first person they talk to. So they'll ask, this is our thing, how do we get it there, and can you do it? And you can see the full gateway right here behind you. This is one of the older illustrations, the Gateway Power and Propulsion Habitat Airlock Logistics. Big name, but right now we just call it Gateway. This is what it was before the Artemis program really kicked off. And now, of course, here we are with the Artemis program. Why are we going to the moon? Why are we building Gateway? And the short answer is that it's a lot safer to test things when you're only 3 days away rather than 2 years. Because with Mars transfer, you have to go out to Mars, you have to wait for the alignment of the planets and come back again. That entire process is a little over 2 years. So what we're doing now is testing a whole bunch of technologies on the lunar surface. And in order to have a high turnaround time on those technologies and be able to test as much as we can, we have to have a sustainable and reusable architecture. And that's what the Gateway is. So we can reuse the Gateway over and over again, eventually reuse our human landing system, reuse all that system so that we can waste as little as possible and do it affordably and for a sustainable approach. Ultimately, our goal is to have a habitat on this south pole of the moon, and we're doing that with the help of a lot of international and commercial partners. And if you think of the entire Apollo program, the longest stay we've had during the Apollo program is about 72 hours. That's not very long. And at the end of those 72 hours, our systems were falling apart. They were breaking, they were covered in dust. Any moving parts, dust gets in there, grinds it down. It covers systems, it sneaks into the habitats, into the modules, it gets in astronauts' lungs. It is a major problem. So figuring out how to live on the moon is going to be a real challenge. And it's all problems that we have to fix before we go to Mars. Mars is even worse. That soil, when exposed to oxygen like we have in our air, becomes a chloride, poisonous. So we're going to have to figure out a way to sort out that dust.
Going back to the dust and all the harsh conditions, not that you have to convince anybody in this room, but for people who are watching or following on our social, that sounds really hard. Why would we want to do that?
But aside from the romantic vision of exploring the galaxy, there's a lot of resources out there that we need. Obviously, the Earth is struggling to maintain 9 billion humans as we're quickly approaching. That's the notional threshold of population that we can sustain. We're going to have to find a way to get resources to sustain human activity. There's a lot of possibilities for Further research, things like medical science, has been advanced on the ISS and potentially advanced on the moon as well. Learning how to grow food and recycle all the things that we bring with us to the moon is directly applicable to life here on Earth. So the more efficient farming and life support systems we find on the moon, the more efficient life support systems we have here on Earth. So vertical farming and things like that, all more doable once we explore the solar system.
So there you have it, a clip, an interview, a conversation we had at Kennedy Space Center that we weren't able to bring a part of our coverage or our live coverage of our special episode of the Carolina Weather Group from earlier this year. And you too can apply to be at a NASA social event. Anyone can apply to these. Just keep a close eye on NASA's Twitter or Facebook account. And when they do a call to action, you can apply. They just held a social event for the Crew-7 launch, which again happened about a week ago. And you're now looking live on the left-hand side of your screen at Crew-6, who will be splashing down off the coast of Florida in just an hour. So they are on orbit and approach to return to Earth, completing their nearly 6-month stay aboard the International Space Station. If you're just joining us, I'm James Brierton, and this is a look at our control room. We are monitoring feeds from NASA, from SpaceX, even from the International Space Station. As we continue to listen in, let's see a little bit of what they're talking about and join the conversation.
And then the trunk separates about 45 seconds after that claw separation, so it's relatively quick. So we're still in claw sep prep.
And I'll take an opportunity to explain what that means. So when they talk about the claw, they're actually talking here about closing the hatch. So the way the capsule works is they had to open the hatch at the front of the capsule in order to dock nose first with the International Space Station. Matter of fact, the Crew-7 capsule is still up there. We don't have a feed right now of it, but that blue on the bottom left, when we get back into radio communication with the International Space Station, you can actually see their Dragon capsule docked nose first right into it. And so it actually is open right now. And what they need to do before they can land here, the Crew-6, they need to close that. They need to latch that down. And that's what we're going to be doing here in the course of the next little bit. And that really helps with the heat shield and making sure that the spacecraft is ready to come through a very hot, obviously, part of the atmosphere. Again, this is going to look like a fireball over portions of Florida, and you may even be able to hear a sonic boom depending on where you are. One of the things we're always keeping a close eye on, whether it is with space launches or space descents, is the weather. So we have a live look at weather conditions right now across the Space Coast in the United States and Florida on the East Coast. They're at Kennedy Space Center. So they're going to be watching things like lightning, and they're going to be watching things like wind. But because we're splashing down in the ocean Apollo style, we also have to watch sea heights. And here's a look right now, and you can see we are lucky in that we don't have any clouds. We don't have any rain off the coast of Florida. It's just a few days after a hurricane came through from the Gulf of Mexico across the panhandle of Florida as a Category 4 storm and then brushed portions of Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. And so I actually think that's a little bit why this return was delayed in part. This was supposed to happen earlier on this Labor Day weekend, and they postponed it a little bit due to weather. And I think that was probably part of it, waiting for those seas to come on down. Because even if that hurricane, that tropical storm, was well off the coast here of the United States, we were still getting rough seas and rip currents associated with that storm. So let's take a look here back at our feed and take a listen in as we are waiting up next for that trunk separation.
Once again, since that claw is now separated, we're able to separate the trunk. That claw is where the umbilicals for power and telemetry were connecting between the Dragon capsule and the trunk.
The pyros fired for that trunk separation.
Dragon SpaceX, nominal trunk jettison.
Copy, nominal trunk jettison.
All right, so yeah, we have a good trunk separation. That starts about a 5-minute clock until we begin that deorbit burn. So that means telemetry is looking good. The nitrox system is primed for cabin and suit cooling, and the heat shield is now exposed and ready for atmospheric reentry. The trunk served its purpose by gathering energy from the sun through the solar rays and converting that into battery power. Since we separated the trunk, we can't generate any more new power, but we don't need to since we're coming home, and Dragon has enough battery power stored already.
Up next, we have the final steps that Dragon will perform prior to reentry, the slew or maneuver to deorbit burn attitude and the deorbit burn itself. This is the last time that the forward Dracos, which are the 4 thrusters located on top of the spacecraft under the nose cone, they will ignite. The deorbit burn will place Dragon on a precise trajectory to the splashdown zone off the coast of Florida and will last about 16 minutes once it starts, and it looks like we're just under 3.5 minutes away from that deorbit burn initiation.
All right, you've been listening.
We did confirm that
live
slewing has
SpaceX and NASA TV coverage. So when they say trunk, they quite literally mean trunk. That was where they could carry cargo, whether that be science experiments or maybe even some small personal items that they're allowed to carry with them up to space. Obviously, they didn't just send all of that out into atmosphere. That trunk is now empty following the conclusion of their mission, and that's what they've gone ahead and kind of detached, exposing again the heat shield to help them come through the Earth's atmosphere. A little under 5 minutes until we get to our next milestone. So I want to talk a little bit more about why these 4 astronauts, why the astronauts still up in the International Space Station are doing what they do, and it brings us back to our conversation about sustaining human life and human exploration of space. And when we get to Mars someday, we're going to need to be able to grow our own food. So in order to perfect that, we want to learn how to do it before we get to Mars. And that's where the International Space Station comes in. How do we grow things when you have no gravity, when you have odd amount of sunlight or maybe odd amount of pH? There's a lot that goes into growing plants, and we got a chance when we went down to the Kennedy Space Center to go into their biolab where they're working to develop space plants that astronauts can and do eat up on the International Space Station. Take a look.
So we're in a lab now where they are doing experiments to simulate growing plants in space, because the longer the missions go and the further from Earth they go, the more dependent astronauts will be on growing their own food.
This can't be a crew-intensive activity. The crew is not we're not devising our crew complements by sending up people who are botanists and farmers like the Martian did. You may see that Mars looks like it's at the end of the roadmap, but in actuality, because of the needs of the food system, it's really the first area we're working towards. Prepackaged food, currently, what we fly in the ISS begins to degrade in certain key nutrients after like 18 months. For Artemis, I can send the prepackaged food up there and we're good to go, no issues. But for a mission to Mars, that's potentially 2 to 3 years, maybe longer in duration, now I have to supplement that diet because certain key nutrients are starting to degrade.
So right now we're moving forward with some really cool plants. We're doing cucumbers and melons. So I think what's interesting is we'll be able to utilize the work that we do here to expand the amount of foods that are available to the astronauts to eat in the future, so that we can alleviate menu fatigue, because we don't want them to get tired of what they're eating.
Or engineer plants that have less inedible material, more fruit associated with them, so we're actually using more of the plants than what you would traditionally grow today.
One of the plant growth systems we have on ISS is called the Advanced Plant Habitat, or the APH, and the experiments that go on there are called the pH experiments. PH04 I didn't mention last time, but we grew peppers in the Advanced Plant Habitat, and then this one is going to be PH07.
Okay, 7, very cool.
And what we're using is technology, science carriers, sensors to help us identify what's going on inside the boxes. And then we develop hardware here in our makerspace, like 3D printing, fabrication, rapid prototyping, to make everything work. One of the features of this experiment is something that we haven't done yet, is collecting a sample from the root zone in microgravity. We use this growth media. It's called arsenite. It's the red clay that you see on baseball fields. And if you open the box in space, it'll float everywhere. So how do you get a root sample back to here? Well, one of our students came up with a flying device that's 3D printed, we're using a thread on the actual lid. This screws in, and then a sample or a core comes out that holds the sample in it. Once the astronaut pulls it out, they put it into the -80 below freezer, and then we bring it back to Earth and do analysis with it. So it's really cool. I don't know much about the analysis, but I do know about the prototyping and the drawings and the 3D printing. So it's like where all microbiology and engineers and biology come together. This is it complete.
in advance and during recovery operations, and Coast Guard patrol boats are deployed to discourage boaters from entering the splashdown zones. We want to stress to the public the need to respect this safety zone. Recovering a spacecraft from the water is a hazardous operation, and any other boats interfering increases the risk to the astronauts in the capsule, the teams working to recover them from the water, and the safety of those that come too close. For the safety of the crew and your safety, we recommend you sit back and watch as we'll be bringing you astronauts' homecoming.
The only exception to that, of course, is if you live in Central Florida and you want to look outside through the window or head out into your front or backyard, you should definitely be able to witness Dragon capsules streaking across the night sky. It'll be super bright.
Absolutely.
Now, like I mentioned earlier, this deorbit burn is the last time that those 4 forward Draco thrusters will fire. Dragon Endeavour has not yet entered the Earth's atmosphere. This deorbit burn is what will line the vehicle up and put it on that final trajectory to the landing site, which, as we just said, is off the coast of Florida, near Jacksonville. Right now, as you can see on your screen, Stephen, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey continue to use their screens to keep tabs on the burn duration, the Draco thruster firings, and trajectory details like the entry angle, capsule perigee, and how much distance remaining until deorbit burn termination. Right now, Dragon is flying itself, so all the crew has to do is stay strapped in their seats and keep tabs on things. Great view there of being able to see exactly what the crew can see with respect to those Draco thrusters firing.
The thing I always wonder as I come back in with you live here is whether or not there's any in-flight entertainment. I know it sounds like a joke, but they do get a rest period during the orbit up and the orbit back down from the International Space Station. So I suspect there probably is. Let's take a look here. We can kind of see where our splashdown site is going to be off the coast of Jacksonville. This is also going to be coming over portions of Mexico. If you happen to be in that area and joining our coverage here tonight, this will be coming down in just under an hour, splashing down there off the coast of Jacksonville. Visors are still up as we are still working our way through orbiting the planet and our deorbit burn. But as you heard there, this is kind of the last time they're going to use some of those rockets. And then we're going to get that nose cone closure that I talked about a little bit earlier coming up. They also talked about the need for safety in the water and how NASA works with its military partners and other agencies to clear out a landing zone. And they want to make sure that there are no boats. They want to make sure there's no aviation, helicopters, drones, you name it, whether they be private or even commercial. So this takes coordination with, say, Orlando Airport to make sure we have a clear corridor. And when we went down to Kennedy at the beginning of the year, we actually got to go inside the hangar where they keep some of these helicopters that they use to keep safety, to provide live video coverage, and to provide live looks at the mission. It's a multifunctional helicopter. Take a look.
We're over here in the flight operations area of Kennedy Space Center, just adjacent to the landing strip that the shuttle used to use, and we're learning a little bit about the aviation support that goes into launching to space.
Basically a small utility helicopter we use here at NASA to do a couple of things, one of which is to do some of the filming for some of our launches. What will happen is you will get a shot of what we like to call a wide angle shot from high altitude. That'll be us in a little helicopter with with the camera that'll get that wide angle shot. So usually it's about 15 to 25 seconds that we'll get. It's dynamic, it's beautiful, it's nighttime. We'll be up providing that. So that's one of the things that we do with the aircraft. Safe distance away from the Falcon 9 as it launches, and then it's an incredible shot. It's incredibly dynamic from like 3,000 to 4,000 feet. It looks really neat, especially at night. So let me open the front up. All the other things that are in here, but of course we do have custom NASA seats. Why does that matter? It just matters because it's awesome. Custom NASA seats. I'll even face it this way. Beautiful seats. They look great. I mean, come on. What's there not to love? So I have generally a single pilot aircraft that actually has an autopilot in it, so I can fly it by myself in instrument and meteorological conditions as well. So if the weather's bad, I can fly it by myself with an autopilot. So if I get in here, which can happen, and as it boots up, this is kind of what some of it looks like as it's booting up. So what I mean by MFDs or multifunctional displays, they're basically displays that can be interchanged. So, but if to answer your question, analog like steam gauges, I don't have any steam gauges in here except for this. So that's a lot of trust, but it's a heavily and very reliable aircraft. I mean, the best helicopter that I've ever flown. So you can quote me on that.
How many different radios do you have to coordinate through all the different groups that you're probably working with at one time?
I'd say about 8 radios.
Wow.
Even more than that, if I count them all right. There's like 8 or 9 radios. Yeah, and during Artemis, I mean, it was instrumental that everyone communicated positively and everyone knew where everyone was at, because that coordination is key to mission success.
Are you guys involved with kind of clearing the launch area in case a boat strays in or whatever?
That's a very good question. That is a part of our role as well. They call that sea surveillance. So basically we go out over the ocean up to sometimes 25, 30 miles out just to ensure that no one's out there. So we'll get a target or a contact. We'll go out and investigate to see if they're inside of that controlled area. And we'll nicely tell them that they need to leave that area or give them kind of a moment of pause to kind of let them know, and a NASA helicopter shows up, at a certain altitude, we definitely want to make sure that they get the message. NASA, we're here to help. And we have people in the back that will do that sort of stuff. We even have a sign that basically is basically says, something like that. Like, hey, hi, we're NASA, we're here to help. We need you to basically back off outside of the protected area.
So about a year ago, there was a launch that was scrapped.
There was.
Because of
there was.
Cruise ship. There was.
Right.
Yes.
And we were not working that one.
That's why.
One of the reasons. So perhaps.
Perhaps that would have made a difference. I'm James Brierton. It's 11:33 p.m. Eastern Time. I want to welcome in our viewers on the Carolina Weather Group, and joining us now on WCNC Plus, you are watching live coverage of the return of NASA SpaceX Crew-6. We'll be returning to Earth here in the matter of hour or so, a little under an hour now, splashing down off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida, come 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time. On the left-hand side of your screen, you are looking live inside that SpaceX Crew Dragon, and we are expecting here momentarily an update on that flight, as we expect that we will be hearing that they will be soon closing the nose cone on the Crew Dragon, as we are continuing to see the thrusters firing on the screen. Those are all touch screens that they use here in the era of spaceflight that we are in, where we use this SpaceX manufactured Crew Dragon, which replaced the Space Shuttle. Space Shuttle, as you may recall, was retired, that is, in 2011. So we are continuing to look live at NASA TV coverage, watching a multitude of feeds here from our control room, and we'll continue to dip around and move between these as we continue to monitor the flight, the weather, and the radio communications between NASA and SpaceX during this interactive program that you're watching here on YouTube, as well as on WCNC Plus. So if you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat, and I'm going to try to answer as many as I possibly can. Dan, I'm trying to get the exact calculation for you on your question about how many orbits that the crew has been experiencing since they left the International Space Station earlier this morning, but we are continuing to see here. You'll also notice that they do in fact have tablets on their legs, and that helps them see a little bit of some some of the system information and some of the controls as well. That dashboard in front of them, you can see that they can control using their gloves. I don't know about you, but during the wintertime when I have gloves on, I have such a terrible time trying to control my phone and other touch screens. I'm sure that somebody thought about that, but they do have some emergency buttons, some actual physical hard buttons that are down there on the bottom shelf in case they needed to use those in event of emergency. And in case you're wondering, it doesn't look like they're clicking a whole lot. It's because the Dragon capsule is flying itself, much like Elon Musk's Tesla vehicles. This vehicle is also self-driven as it is continuing now to make its deorbit burn around the Earth as we prepare for that 12:17 a.m. Eastern time. What is different about our coverage tonight versus coverage you'll see elsewhere is we are showing you clips from behind the scenes from a NASA event that we got invited to. The Carolina Weather Group was lucky enough to be invited down to a NASA social event earlier this year. We got to go places the public doesn't always get to go, and so those are the clips that some of you have already been watching with us here on YouTube, and we'll have more of them coming your way for those of you just joining us on WCNC+. Again, we have a little under an hour until the crew, which consists of 2 American astronauts, 1 Arab Emirates astronaut, and 1 cosmonaut from Russia, will be coming splashing down off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida at 12:17 a.m. Eastern time. So if you're watching or know anyone in Florida, you can let them know that they might be able to see or hear this between 12:05 and 12:20 as this essentially Firebird ball will be flying over the Sunshine State as it looks to splash down. You know, it says off the coast of Jacksonville, but you could also probably say that's off the coast of Georgia. And you know that NASA crews are out there right now preparing. And what we will see later on in this evening, in this telecast, after we get to about 12:17 and beyond, is that the crew will be met by boats, which will have helicopters standing by. They'll have doctors on board. They'll have engineers. Some of the first people who will climb into the water and then onto the capsule will help safely hoist the capsule onto a boat when the crew will then be met by photographers, officials, and most importantly, a doctor to make sure that they're okay. And I'll even let you know now that when we get to that point, we'll be able to hopefully see some of the live video of them stepping onto what is essentially Earth for the first time in nearly 6 months, but they're going to be doing it escorted in a wheelchair or a gurney, and that's really nothing to be concerned about. But this is the first time they'll be experiencing Earth gravity in 6 months as well, too, despite their regular exercises up there on the International Space Station. We're going to be taking throughout the course of this broadcast a live look in, a live listen at what NASA and SpaceX are talking about as part of their broadcast. So let's do that now. It's been a moment since we've heard from them. Their coverage is originating out of SpaceX Control in Hawthorne, California, with these live looks inside the Crew Dragon. Let's see what they're up to.
And allows them to decrease that altitude. And it's a 16-minute burn, so that will take us to about 8:40 Pacific, so just a couple of minutes left. They have about 25 minutes until they start experiencing some drag on the atmosphere, and that allows the Dragon spacecraft to do a couple of things. It allows them to close the nose cone, as you mentioned, and also slew the Dragon once again and get into the entry interface with the pica tiles and the heat shield pointed in the right direction to take the loads of the friction of the atmosphere.
Exactly. So if you want to think about Dragon's orientation, at the moment, the forward end, or if you think of how Dragon is oriented when it's on the launch pad, it's the top end of the Dragon spacecraft is basically pointing forward along their trajectory. So those thrusters are performing a retrograde burn, which is slowing the vehicle down. So we will want to, after this burn is complete, basically rotate the capsule or slew it in order to make sure that that heat shield is then the end. The bottom end is what is actually pointing toward, in the direction of their trajectory, so that that heat shield is able to do its job, which is really utilize that friction that will be made while coursing through the Earth's atmosphere and slow that vehicle down significantly. Once again, we're going from an orbital velocity of about 17,500 miles per hour, and that atmospheric reentry, that heat shield action will take us down to about 350 miles per hour. So we're about just over 1 minute remaining in the deorbit burn. This is the burn that essentially commits the crew to that precise landing zone just off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. Once again, we are targeting a splashdown time of 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern.
And again, this is Mission Control here in Hawthorne. The team's here monitoring Dragon's progress and the progress of that deorbit burn. It'll be the crew operations and resource engineer, the core, that's the voice from here in Mission Control in Hawthorne, that relays the burn performance status up to the crew via Dragon to ground.
On your screen there is SpaceX Core for this operational shift. On console tonight is Jake Vendel. As Gary mentioned, this is the primary communicator from SpaceX Mission Control to the crew. Very similar to NASA's Capcom role.
Dragon, SpaceX, deorbit burn complete and nominal. Nose cone closure initiated.
SpaceX Dragon copies.
All right, good news there coming from SpaceX Core, Jake Vendel, letting us know that the deorbit burn completed and everything went nominal or as expected. So that's all really good news.
Very good. We are in the deorbit sequence now. So that you just heard the nose cone is about to close, and I can see it's actually closing now. In the background, the Dragon is currently inhibiting those forward bulkhead Draco thrusters that we just used to complete the deorbit burn, ensuring it's safe to latch the nose cone and shut for reentry. Also, the vehicle has initiated the nitrox suit purge. So this will help Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey cool and comfortable during re-entry, which is coming up here in about 20 minutes. At this point, the nose cone is closing again and protecting the forward hatch for re-entry. Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey are using their screens to monitor the locking of the nose cone, which is done by a set of hooks.
So we're about 2 minutes until the nose cone is completely closed and locked in. Once again, we are in the deorbit sequence. So far, we have separated the trunk and we have completed the deorbit burn. And right now, we are closing the nose cone. This is the final physical change or modification to the Dragon capsule prior to re-entry. After the nose cone is closed, we will slew or reorient Dragon to basically make sure that the heat shield is what is pointing first toward planet Earth, and that will line us up for atmospheric reentry.
And a lot of that is in work now in concurrence. The closing of the nose cone is underway, as well as the slewing. Again, there's plenty of margin here from the time that the deorbit burn is complete, that 16-minute burn, and the time of entry interface. Make sure there's, if they have time to correct anything, that is already built in, but everything's looking good so far. Making sure the heat shields are pointed the right way, nose cone is closed, and the crew is prepped with that nitrogen purge. So we saw the views of the crew from the inside of the capsule with their visors up. Again, those visors will come down, and part of the, not only do the suits actually provide that extra protection, but Kate, you mentioned that they'll actually make sure that they provide cooling and comfort, because there's a lot of heat that's being generated through the reentry process. The outside of the vehicle can experience upwards of 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll purge some cool air through the suits. But the interior of the capsule, there's also a thermal system that will help pump some cool air there as well. So the crew generally stays really comfortable, even though the exterior of the capsule does get super hot, as you said. With that plasma buildup, it'll be certainly one of the more dynamic things that the spacecraft goes through during its mission. But yeah, the crew stays pretty comfortable, and that nitrox air, which is a mixture of nitrogen and oxygen, the same stuff that is put into scuba tanks for scuba divers, that same breathing air, we pump that through the suits to allow the crew to stay super comfy during their reentry.
We did get confirmation that the nose cone is closed. So this deorbit sequence we're really making our way through very well.
As we begin the second half of entry, Dragon is now beginning to inject that cool nitrox air that I mentioned before, that's being delivered to the suits worn by Stephen, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey. Again, this is what will allow the crew to remain comfortable while the external temperatures of Dragon reach 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat shield will be pointing forward, leading the capsule to the landing site. Now, speaking of that heat shield, Dragon's primary heat shield is comprised of Pica 3.0, Pica meaning phenolic impregnated carbon ablator. The first generation Pica was initially developed by NASA for studying and sampling comets within our solar system.
Yeah, really cool history here. SpaceX partnered with NASA to develop Pica X, which was the second generation product used on all Dragon 1 cargo resupply missions that successfully resupplied the space station on 20 different missions. Pica 3.0 was developed specifically for use on the Dragon 2 crew and cargo, with enhanced structural and thermal properties that optimized the heat shield and drove down cost and mass.
Yeah, pretty.
All right, we will get back to NASA and SpaceX's coverage in just a moment as we continue to look live at Hawthorne, California, entering the second phase now. Dan, the breaking news man, watching from Washington State, had a number of questions for me, including how many orbits were there as the crew made their descent from the International Space Station, as well as how some things such as aborting would work. Well, once they got that go-ahead from Mission Control in Houston, their options to continue to orbit were then beyond them as they headed towards the splashdown site off the coast of Jacksonville. In the course of our coverage tonight, we saw the ending use of some of the last rockets, some of the last booster rockets that would allow them to make any last minute adjustments on which splashdown site they were using. I'll show you on a map in a minute which one they are heading towards. As I'm trying to find an answer to so many of your questions that are coming in tonight, I did want to play a little bit of audio that came our way as we were continuing to monitor radio communications between all of the different mission controls as well as public broadcast tonight. We captured this audio about 10:50 p.m. Eastern time, about 10 minutes before we came on the air. And this is when controllers gave the crew permission to begin their deorbit. It also has, Dan, some statistics, maybe not all the ones you're looking for, but some of them, and I wanted to play it for you. So in just a moment, you'll hear it, and you'll also notice the video is black. The video you are seeing is from a camera outside the International Space Station, so eventually you'll actually see the Dragon capsule that Crew-7 used.
Dragon, SpaceX, we are go for deorbit entry and landing. How copy?
Go for deorbit entry and landing. That's good news. Thank you.
And on a similar note, Steve, since launch of March 2nd, on March 2nd of this year, I think you've traveled around the Earth about 3,000 times. It seems this will be the last time around.
And we were just talking about that, and so Tom thought he might want to stay a little bit longer, but I think the rest of us want to get back down to the water.
Yeah, like I just said, we're going to burn.
Good. We see tonight's long burn, 16 minutes, 15 seconds. That's a good rap song for Woody to give us some information on.
This is Mission Control Houston. That exchange between the spacecraft communicator at the SpaceX Mission Control Center in Hawthorne, California, and Steve Bowen, the commander aboard the Dragon Endeavour spacecraft. To be exact, this crew will have completed 2,976 orbits of the Earth in a mission spanning 78.8 million statute miles over 186 days at the time of splashdown. We're about 43 minutes away from the deorbit burn itself, a burn in excess of 16 minutes to slow the vehicle down and allow it to drop out of orbit to begin the trek back to Earth, with splashdown scheduled east of Jacksonville at 11:17 p.m. Central Time, 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time. The weather conditions in the splashdown zone are ideal. No issues associated with Endeavour's systems. Everything is in readiness for the return of Bowen, Woody Hoburg, Sultan Alneyadi, and Andrey Fedyaev to wrap up their 6-month mission.
Okay, and since that audio was recorded about an hour ago, we have completed our deorbit burn. We've closed the nose cone, and now we are heading for that splashdown at 12:17 a.m. Eastern time off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. So where exactly will they be landing? Well, we can actually get a pretty good indication by looking at Flight Tracker. This is another one of those things that, as much as I love the NASA SpaceX broadcast tonight, they won't be showing you this. So let's go ahead and show you exactly where we expect the splashdown of NASA's SpaceX Crew-6 to happen. And looking off here, you can see the coast of Jacksonville. You can even see places like Brunswick, Georgia, and you can see one of those NASA helicopters that is now doing an orbit out there off the coast. We talked about those helicopters earlier in our broadcast tonight using some footage and some interviews we conducted during our NASA social tour earlier this year. But we can also see, in addition to that NASA helicopter, we've got a NASA aircraft out here as well too. And we'll actually momentarily, fairly soon, the next few minutes, start to get some live pictures from these aircraft that are out there right now out over the Atlantic Ocean, which, based on the latest weather conditions we are seeing, is seeing pretty nice out there off the coast of Florida. Just a few days ago, did they have a hurricane that came on through? That would have been a problem for any sort of landing, any sort of splashdown, whether that would have been on the Gulf side or the Atlantic Ocean side. But taking a look here, this is the live screens that they see at Kennedy Space Center, showing them weather conditions, tracking things like lightning, wind, and precipitation. Of course, tonight they will also be tracking the ocean, the currents, the wave heights, so that they can go ahead and safely splash down and then collect the Crew Dragon capsule back out of the water and safely fly these 4 men back to the United States. Matter of fact, they've essentially done a round trip since they left from Kennedy Space Center about 6 months ago, as you might imagine. Some of them probably fairly anxious to get back home either to the United States, the United Arab Emirates, or to Russia, because it truly is an international space station. And not only do these astronauts and these scientists study science and do experiments together, but they fly together. So on our flight today, we have 1 Russian cosmonaut, and we have NASA astronauts who also fly with the Russians when they launch to and from the International Space Station. But everything's looking very nice here off the southeast coast of the United States as we're looking at the weather across the Space Coast region. And we will continue to monitor. We are in a bit of a radio blackout period right now. That is to be expected, and it's because there's so much plasma building up on the outside of the Dragon capsule that we can't see or hear from that capsule right now. We will get some ground pictures in just a few minutes that will be absolutely outstanding, and we'll make sure we take them to you live so you can see what essentially will be a fireball coming across the Gulf of Mexico over the coast of Florida, starting from about 12:05 until splashdown at 12:17. If you're anywhere in Florida, maybe even portions of southeastern Georgia, you might be able to see or maybe even hear some of this as it flies across the sky. We've been talking a lot about some of the opportunities that I had and that you at home as a Carolina Weather Group viewer got to have with me virtually following a NASA social event. That's an opportunity where NASA invites social creators and influencers down to, whether it be Kennedy, Houston, or other NASA complex, to really get a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And mine was centered around the Crew-6 launch. And so one of the things we got to do was our own media briefing in the media briefing room that you normally see on NASA TV with reporters and astronauts. And we got to talk with current and former astronauts as well as other NASA officials. And one of the questions that has really stuck out in my mind that one of my fellow NASA social event participants asked is, what is it like to sleep in space? Because oddly enough, that is something that your brain has to get used to, right? You're not able to really lay down. You might be floating. So take a listen to this Q&A portion from our NASA social event earlier this year, and I will continue to monitor these live pictures. And if we get anything we need to break away to rejoin live coverage, we'll certainly do that. But let's take a quick listen to this Q&A question.
Hi, I'm Mario Apuzzo, coming from Los Angeles, California. I'm really curious, how is the sleep experience while you're out in space? And what are your dreams like? Is there anything special that you can share with us?
You want to go first?
Sure, I'll talk. So I think the first sensation to kind of work through, and it's a little bit different for everyone. Everyone sleeps a little bit, restrains himself a little differently, but I'm sure you've all had that feeling when you start to fall asleep at night, and if your arm goes off the corner of the bed or something like that, and you like startle up, and you've probably all had the experience of being in a roller coaster and the feeling of your stomach coming up. So you have that. I mean, you are in free fall when you're in space, and so as soon as you close your eyes, you snap back awake because your body is telling you you're falling. So it's really hard for your brain to ignore that, because if you were to be falling, like walking forward and falling, you couldn't fall asleep while you're falling. It's just your brain won't allow that to happen. You'll wake up before you hit the ground. So it takes different people different times, but for me, about 2-ish days to actually get over that feeling and be able to close my eyes and not have my brain kick yourself back awake. In terms of dreams, I don't honestly remember any significant changes, but I do distinctly remember both on the way up and the way down. The first time on the way up, so on orbit, I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks in, was the first time I had a dream where I was floating in the dream. And that next day was the first time that as much as you know you can use the walls and the ceiling in space, you'll always reorient your body for conversations and to talk, to work in the way that it looks like on the ground, because the laptops and the equipment is oriented a certain direction. But after that time, it didn't matter. And I could come around a corner, it didn't matter. It was, and all of a sudden, like, you notice little things. So like the first few weeks, the ground is always asked, like, did you power off that payload? And that's their gentle way of saying, hey, idiot, you like kicked it with your foot, because we're just like tearing through Ethernet cables and bumping into things. But after that 3 weeks, once that clicked, it was like, oh, everything makes sense. And you just notice, like, just floating through, you just see something just like you can now in your house, like right away, you're like, that's out of place. And that was when I had that dream on the way, after I landed. The first time I got up in the middle of the night, like that, it was like 10 hours after we landed. And even though the chair was on the ground, I could not convince myself, it was dark in the room, we're in crew quarters, that I was not standing on the wall. Like, I actually had to have my wife like come, like help me get off the ground, because I was convinced I was going to fall over because I was on the wall. Obviously I was not on the wall. I was the chair. I was doing this with the chair, but I couldn't connect. And then about the first good sleep I had that wasn't ambient induced after landing, I had a dream where I was talking to people in the PMM and they were floating, but I was standing on the ground in the PMM. And when I woke up from that, everything was fine, like totally back to normal. So it's amazing what your brain does. And we talk about, you're like a baby in space. You can't eat on your own. You can't poop or pee on your own. You really can't do anything on your own, much like a baby. And just like a baby, all you want to do is sleep, because your brain is doing a whole bunch of rewickering in the background, which is actually one of the things we study with some of the GRASP experiments and some stuff for sensory deprivation. So it's pretty cool how your brain rewires itself, and it takes effort and energy for it to do that. But yeah, everyone, and then once you do adjust to sleeping, some people like to be bungeed in, some people like to free float. I know on the shuttle, different people did different things. So that's kind of personal preference, but it's the best sleep I've had in my life. I have 3 young kids, so no one was waking me up in the middle of the night. So it was awesome.
I didn't have any problem sleeping, but I found out I didn't need to sleep as much. I don't know, maybe it wasn't, we were really busy, but I will go along with what you're saying about, you can really tell first-time flyers from folks that have flown more than once in the experience. I remember on my last flight, Sergei Krikalev, who had been a year for a space, it was like poetry in motion, watching him move through the vehicle. And on a previous flight, I had a newbie that flew with us, and it was like they were bouncing off the walls the whole time, even after 2 weeks. They hadn't adapted to zero G. The interesting thing is the physiological aspects that Raj was talking about. It takes time to adapt to zero G and time to adapt to 1G coming back. But with each flight, you learn, your brain remembers. And I'll never forget my second flight. Once we got to zero G, it was like, hey, I'm here, I'm back. It's amazing. So you adapt quicker each time to both zero G and 1G with the number of flights. I never had any weird dreams, but something that's really cool is, especially on a high inclination flight, it's all dark and you're sleeping at night, and all of a sudden one of these high energy particles hits your retina and you get this flash in your eye from so that's kind of interesting.
Cool, but also depressing. It's like, that's my cornea getting bombarded by radiation. So, but it's
Another clip from our NASA social event earlier this year. A live look now at Hawthorne, California, SpaceX Control Center there, as we are continuing to wait for our Crew-6 Dragon to come back out of their planned communication blackout. Let's take a quick listen here.
Com blackout. Dragon Endeavour, see you on the other side at 0411.
0411, we'll talk to you then.
Okay, so we're going into that radio blackout now, which is all about the plasma that will be building up outside the Dragon capsule that will prevent the communications, including both video and audio, until we're able to touch base with them. And again, in the next few minutes, we do have some questions that are coming in. We have Cody who's watching. He is watching from about, let's see, the east coast of Florida. Craig wants to know, how soon will it be on the east coast of Florida? And the answer to that question is pretty time sensitive now, as we come up on midnight Eastern time. It is now the top of the hour, Monday, September 4th, here on the East Coast. And Craig, to answer your question, between 12:05 and 12:20 is when folks like yourself watching from Florida will be able to see this shoot across the sky. We anticipate it's going to go just north over Tampa, over places like the Villages and Gainesville, maybe if you're looking north from Lakeland or Orlando, and then we'll continue just north of Palm Coast and south of Jacksonville before splashing down there off the coast of Jacksonville, where we saw some of those aviation supports from NASA flying out there a little bit earlier, where they will be reuniting with the crew upon splashdown. So we do anticipate that coming our way in the next 16 minutes as we are continuing live coverage here on the Carolina Weather Group and WCNC Plus. I am James Brierton, located in Charlotte, North Carolina, and this is live coverage of the NASA SpaceX Crew-6 return to Earth. In just a little while, we will be seeing that splashdown. And again, we are waiting for the crew to come back out of their planned blackout, which is happening right now because of that plasma buildup. So I want to give you a little bit of an idea of what we can expect as we look ahead to what will be coming your way here in the next half hour or so, especially with so many of us looking forward to that splashdown, which will mark the end of their nearly 6-month mission aboard the International Space Station. And so here in the next little bit, we will be looking at speeds of about 350 miles per hour, and those parachutes will be deployed automatically when sensors pick up that the capsule is moving at the correct speed and at the correct altitude, and they'll be looking at things like pressure and positioning sensors in order to determine that. So the first of the parachutes deployed at about 18,000 feet, and that will really begin to slow down the Crew Dragon capsule, that by the time the main parachutes deploy, we'll be moving 190 miles per hour, and that happens about 6,500 feet. That will help the crew experience a gentle splashdown, or at least what they hope to be a gentle splashdown there in the Atlantic Ocean. And when they do that, they'll be moving at about 16 miles an hour, which is obviously much slower than where they started. And yet, I think probably we'll still feel that as they come to a sudden stop from 16 miles an hour down to 0. This experience will bring some of the highest G loads that they've experienced, around 3 to 5 Gs. And so they will be bringing into those pressurized suits, bringing down the visors in case there are any issues during this return. They'll have those suits as an extra layer of protection, as we are now looking at the return of Crew-6, which the folks at NASA and SpaceX have been flying with humans aboard ever since we did Demo 2 back in 2020. And so we will be watching for that to happen. The first parachutes at about 4 minutes before the splashdown. The splashdown itself anticipated at 12:17 a.m. And so we will begin to see some live video of the Crew Dragon capsule making its way across portions of Florida and out over the Atlantic Ocean in the minutes leading up to that. And we, of course, will bring those pictures to you live when they happen. If you've been enjoying any of these clips that we've been showing you throughout the broadcast tonight, you will find them on our Carolina Weather Group YouTube channel. We are a weekly show covering weather, science, technology, and more. And we have a full 60-minute episode from the Kennedy Space Center NASA social event, shot in 4K if that's your thing. And you can go more behind the scenes on what we learned there, not only about Crew-6, but also Artemis. So as you might know, Artemis is going to bring humans back to the moon for the first time in decades. Since I was at Kennedy, we have since learned which astronauts will be flying on Artemis 2, including one with ties to my home state here in North Carolina. But I actually asked a question to an astronaut, a current astronaut who is a part of that Artemis program, still has a chance to fly Artemis 3. And I wanted to know what it's like waiting anticipation of finding out whether or not he or his friends might get a chance to go back to the moon. Take a listen.
My name is James Brierton from Charlotte, North Carolina. My question is for Raj. You're a trained professional, but as a human being, I wonder what it's like dealing with the suspense, waiting to find out who's going to fly Artemis 2, 3, and beyond.
It's actually pretty easy. I'd be happy with anyone in the office to do it. I mean, I think the whole reason I applied again twice, so I applied once and didn't make it in. The reason I applied again is everyone in the office is awesome. So I would, I don't think it matters who it is. We'll all be excited and all fall in line to support that person and those people. I think, we were actually talking, I was talking with some of the PA folks. I think the most common misconception about astronauts is that our job is to fly in space. Well, that is a job, but most of our job is not flying in space. You mentioned 28 years, which is the same number Tom Marshburn, who was my pilot on Crew 3, was in the office. And so out of 28 years in the office, he flew like 500 some days. But that's when you look at the percentages, that's a small amount, but it's flying in space is awesome. Don't get me wrong, but we love our day job. So whether it was helping with the commercial crew and working with Dana before I flew, or helping with HLS and the Lunar Lander now, that is super exciting stuff. And so, I would love to get assigned to Artemis. Everyone would, but we also love our job.
Some very cool stuff. You could actually apply yourself to future NASA social events. Just keep an eye on NASA's social accounts, and you might get an opportunity to go down to a launch or many of the other cool things that NASA does across the country and around the globe. Looking back now live at Hawthorne, California, home of SpaceX Control, as we are awaiting the end of this radio communication blackout. It is anticipated. It is something that is normal. It lasts for about 7 minutes, and it's due to the formation of plasma around the spacecraft. During this time, there is no vehicle telemetry information being received by Mission Control or even the recovery teams out there in the ocean awaiting the return of the crew. There's also no external commanding of the vehicle or voice communication possible. Not even walkie-talkies are working right now. As a reminder, the Dragon is designed to fly itself, and during the re-entry process, it will begin to slow itself down from the orbital velocity of 17,500 miles per hour, and the top temperature that the Dragon will experience upon re-entry, in terms of the exterior temperature, is around 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And so earlier tonight during our live coverage, we talked a little bit about how we separated from the trunk, we closed the nose cone, and we got that heat shield exposed to help protect the astronauts from that 3,500 degree Fahrenheit heat that they are experiencing making their way through the atmosphere. So this expected blackout period lasts several minutes. We are in that right now. And in the next few minutes, we are expecting it to end and begin to get our first ground pictures. And so if you're watching us right now on the Carolina Weather Group YouTube channel, and maybe you're outside, we have now entered that period of time where folks in Florida might have a chance to see or hear the return of this Crew Dragon capsule, as it'll be making its way across the state in the course of the next few minutes. We obviously would be very interested to know whether or not you see or hear it, and you can comment live with us if you're watching on the Carolina Weather Group YouTube channel, and we'll keep you posted if you're joining us on our simulcast on the WCNC Plus app for Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and a number of other devices. We welcome in those viewers as well too. This is the voice of James Brierton in Charlotte, North Carolina, and you are looking live once again at SpaceX Mission Control. In a few minutes, we'll hand things back over to SpaceX and NASA TV for their coverage of this landing. We're anticipating seeing some amazing imagery, bringing these astronauts back home. They are coming home after nearly 6 months orbiting the Earth, and they are part of a team of international astronauts and scientists who have been aboard the International Space Station, and they were relieved just about a week or so ago by Crew-7, who will now spend about 6 months up there in space, continuing so many of the scientific missions we've been telling you about during our live coverage here tonight on the Carolina Weather Group. And we're so glad you are here with us as we continue to marvel at this really amazing technology that humankind has achieved. Let's take you back over now to NASA SpaceX coverage. I think we're getting some of our first imagery coming in from some of those NASA aircraft that are out there. Take a listen.
Those views of the Dragon vehicle in the middle of its entry interface. Again, we're about 4 minutes in. We have a tally-ho on the vehicle from the WB-57. And actually maybe about 5 minutes in at this point. It's So maybe a little bit more than 2 minutes. Again, there's some variation in the predicted 7-minute time period. It's not exact. We might hear a little early, a little later.
So as we were saying, if you're in Central Florida, head outside right now. You should be able to see glowing streak cross over as we are targeting. There's that streak I was just mentioning. That's a live view, not thermal. This is heading towards the Atlantic coast of near Jacksonville, Florida. So a beautiful view, very such a striking visual that we have for these nighttime splashdowns.
Recovery teams are in position off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. And we are still targeting our expected splashdown time of 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern. We only have about a minute and some change of this blackout period anticipated. And again, there's some variation on when we can hear from the crew.
So what you're seeing on your...
Dragon, SpaceX, ComCheck.
So at this point, we're going to hear SpaceX Core begin to hail. As Gary said, this blackout period is estimated. So we're now beginning to reach out to the crew to see if we've regained that communications capability. What you're...
Dragon, SpaceX, ComCheck.
What you're seeing on your screen now is a live view of the thermal cam on the WB-57.
SpaceX Dragon.
And we hear Crew-6 from inside the cabin on the back end of the blackout.
Copy, Dragon. We see a healthy flight computer. Expect automated chute deployment.
SpaceX Dragon, copy.
There's our live view of the crew, our first view of them on the other side of that communications blackout. At this point in time, they are re-entering through the Earth's atmosphere over the coast of Florida, heading towards Jacksonville, Atlantic coast. Up next will be the deployment of the drogue parachutes, which should happen in about 2 minutes, just over 2 minutes.
You can see they got through some of the thicker parts of the atmosphere, and that plasma buildup is starting to dissipate. We have about, less than 2 minutes or so.
Dragon, SpaceX, GPS converged. Expect nominal altitude for drogue chute deploy.
SpaceX Dragon, copy. Receive it.
All right, so that call out just letting the crew know that they can expect to have the initial parachute deployment. That is the drogue parachutes. And that those typically deploy about 18,000 feet. At that point in time, the capsule is going around 350 miles per hour.
Some of the data and telemetry from Dragon is in meters, so if you do hear those calls from the crew and from us, some of the telemetry we're seeing is in the metric system. Confirmation that seat rotation is in progress. This allows the crew to be in the proper position to take the loads of the chutes as they experience the G-forces that the chutes exhibit upon deployment. They provide some drag on the vehicle. And again, we're traveling about 350 miles an hour. So from here, with the drogue deployments and main deployment, we're going to get down to about 15 miles an hour. Drogue deployment coming up in approximately
Dragon,
20 seconds.
Brace for drogue window.
And we're roughly 30 seconds away from that drogue deployment. SpaceX Core just telling the crew to prepare for the deployment of those drogue parachutes. At this point in time, they are around, or when the drogues are deployed, they're traveling around 350 miles per hour. At the time that the main parachutes are deployed, just seconds later, they'll be going around 120 miles per hour. So these drogue parachutes help provide further deceleration as well as stability for the capsule prior to those main parachute deployments.
Drogue pyros have fired, and we have good confirmation of drogue chutes. 2 drogues.
It's a view from inside the parachute bucket.
Dragon, nominal descent rate, and recovery team reports a visual on 2 healthy drogues.
SpaceX Dragon copies, that's good news.
Should see drogue chute jettison here momentarily. We'll see those 2 chutes that you see be released from the capsule, just like so, and release the 4 parachutes, now deploying.
At this point in time, Dragon has saved all of its propulsion systems and is now has already terminated that nitrox suit and cabin purges. Those were helping to keep the crew cool during the reentry. Looks like we have 4 very beautiful and healthy main parachutes.
Dragon, we see a nominal descent rate on 4 healthy mains.
SpaceX Dragon copies, and SpaceX Dragon coming up on 1,000.
So there's that confirmation.
Copy, 1,000 meters.
Confirmation of those 4 healthy chute deployments. Now standing by for splashdown. At the point of splashdown, the capsule will be going about 15 or 16 miles per hour. Continuing to decelerate from a rate of from a speed of about 120 miles per hour.
800.
So we will now begin.
Copy, 800.
To hear Commander Steve Bowen call out the altitude as they approach the water surface.
That is again in meters.
Landing in water is simpler and provides more margin against unlikely parachute issues. We had to learn how to make Dragon waterproof, but once you do that, it's very much a rinse, review, reuse type process.
600.
Copy, 600.
600 meters, and the descent rate is as predicted, meaning we're targeting that splashdown time in about a minute.
Live view of Dragon Endeavour with the Crew-6 team members on board being held up by 4 beautiful main parachutes.
Dragon, we see 400.
We're now about 400 meters above the ocean surface.
SpaceX Dragon 200 braced for splashdown.
Copy, braced for splashdown.
Again, the seats have been rotated in a position to take the loads of re-entry and parachute deployment as well as splashdown. The crew is braced. We are inside 100 meters.
Dragon Endeavour continuing its slow descent. There we can see splashdown on screen. Those parachutes are then cut and released. Dragon Endeavour has now returned home. NASA astronauts Steve Bowen, Woody Hoburg, Sultan Alneyadi, and Andrey Fedyaev.
SpaceX Dragon splashdown. We are in water rough riding.
Copy, splashdown, and we see main chutes cut.
After a 17-hour return journey from space, Crew-6 is home.
So the teams have been ready and waiting about 3 nautical miles away, so it's going to take them about 30 minutes to make their way to Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey inside the Dragon. You can see the recovery forces in some of the views that you're seeing. Of course, these views being provided by the recovery vessels. You saw there was a helo deployed, providing some visuals and lighting of the Dragon capsule.
Stable 1.
Copy, stable 1. Dragon Endeavour, on behalf of NASA and SpaceX, welcome back home. Thank you for flying SpaceX.
Thanks, SpaceX Endeavour. We greatly appreciate all the support from all the initial training through the launch, throughout the mission, keeping us abreast of all the status of the vehicle, and all the support all the way down. This has been incredible, greatly appreciated, and look forward to working with you all again.
Copy all, and you've got a room full of happy people here. We've got some systems to verify safe before we give the boats a go to approach. I'll be back with you on that topic in a minute.
SpaceX Dragon copies, we'll just enjoy the wallowing here. It might be seething, so maybe I'll be napping soon.
So there we just heard SpaceX Core just indicating to the crew that we're going to do some checks here. Here from Mission Control Hawthorne, we're going to do some system checks to make sure that everything is safe as necessary on the Dragon Endeavour capsule. They will then give the go for safe approach to the teams there that you see on your screen in the fast boats. One of those boats will focus on recovering the parachutes from the water. The other will begin inspections, a sniff test for those onboard propellants, nitrogen tetroxide and monomethylhydrazine. They are toxic if someone were to breathe them, so we definitely want to ensure the safety of the entire recovery team as well as the crew. So one of the teams in the fast boats will perform a sniff test using devices while wearing personal protective equipment to ensure that none of those propellants have leaked out and that there's no vapors lingering from, just many minutes ago when those thrusters were actually firing back in space.
Precisely. Now, this is the fourth splashdown of Dragon Endeavour and completes the fourth mission, Crew-6, splashing down right on time, 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time, 9:17 p.m. Pacific Time. We're getting views from the recovery vessels that are out many nautical miles away from the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. And the crew and teams here in Hawthorne reported a stable 1 position. That just notifies that the capsule is in the ideal position, floating in the Atlantic Ocean there, upright, with the heat shield in the water and the nose cone pointed towards the sky, as you see there.
James Brierton back with you from the Carolina Weather Group, streaming at WCNC+. You were looking at live pictures for astronauts back on Earth in nearly 6 months, floating in or bobbing in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Jacksonville. We've been showing some of your comments on the screen. I am actually so happy that so many of you got to go outside and see this as the astronauts made their final pass around the Earth, specifically flying over the Gulf of Mexico, places like Tampa and Orlando and Jacksonville, Florida, just before splashing down. Congratulations out there to Dragon. I really like this comment we got on our Carolina Weather Group YouTube channel in the last few minutes. I don't know how people still don't believe the astronauts going to outer space. Just look to the sky. As Reed says on YouTube, it was amazing to see. And Melanie saying she actually heard the sonic boom as the astronauts broke that sound barrier on their way back down. Melanie seeing it there in Florida. She wasn't the only one who heard the sonic boom. A couple others of you watching along with us said that you heard or saw the Dragon as it's made its way over Florida. That's, I guess, one of the benefits of being able to see the Dragon when it splashes down in the East Coast side on the Atlantic Ocean side, as opposed to Crew-5, which splashed down on the Gulf of Mexico side. So it didn't have that last pass over Florida for so many of you to necessarily see. I did get a question unrelated to splashdown from Dan, the breaking news man, who has been participating in our Q&A here on the Carolina Weather Group YouTube channel throughout the night. How many people are able to stay on the International Space Station? The most I've ever had is 13. They had probably a 10 or 11 recently or so, but they do have some extra capacity up there because every so often there will be a problem with trying to get a crew back down. And the Russians have experienced it at the end of last year and the early part of this year with some of their Soyuz capsules having some compression issues, and that left some folks stranded, if you will, up on the International Space Station a little bit longer than maybe they intended. There you have some more live looks. It's going to take, again, as we heard them say, about half an hour to get the crew out of the capsule, because the first thing that some of these crews are that are now approaching, some of the personnel that are now approaching, are going to do first is take some measurements to make sure there aren't any toxic gases still lingering around the outside of that Dragon. You can see here through these night vision shots that were being provided to us from NASA TV, some of those fast-moving Go boats are now approaching, taking those measurements. We might even see folks climbing onto the capsule here in the next few minutes, but we're not going to see the astronauts come back out until the capsule has been hoisted back up onto a SpaceX boat. We've been tracking along on Flight Tracker to know exactly where all of this is happening. And you can actually see there on flightradar24.com where NASA has some of its aviation assets. They've been flying around getting us those beautiful live pictures. You can see them orbiting here with their WB-57 as we are continuing to watch recovery operations underway. And I can actually switch this for you, if you will. Oh, let's take a look at this real fast. What we got here from
A
NASA TV.
beautiful capture of the moment when Crew-6 was re-entering over Florida. We can actually see NASA's VAB and Pad 39A in the distance. So this is such a cool time-lapse capture of the re-entry streak that we saw just minutes ago of the Crew-6 re-entry and splash.
That is so cool. And that's what so many of you in our comments tonight are telling us that you are seeing from where you might be with us tonight in Florida. And to have that photo that they just showed on NASA TV showing that historic Kennedy Space Center is absolutely amazing. We've been tracking not only the aviation support, but also the boats that are out there in the Atlantic Ocean. And here is Megan, the SpaceX vessel that will be bringing the capsule back onto shore. The crew won't have to wait for that boat to arrive. They will be airlifted back to the coast so that they can get back to Kennedy Space Center and back into crew quarters as soon as possible. And the clip you heard a little bit earlier, Raja Shari, one of the astronauts who we got to talk to during our trip to Kennedy Space Center, talked about what some of those first nights are back on Earth after floating in space for so long and trying to retrain your brain. Taking a look again, you can see some of those aviation assets still up over what is a recovery here of the crew, the 4 inside their capsule waiting for that door to be opened. But first, they will be hoisted back up onto a SpaceX ship that'll be coming your way in the next few minutes live right here on the Carolina Weather Group and WCNC+. Thank you so much for so many of you who have decided to join in tonight for our interactive broadcast, taking you inside. We're going to continue to stay here a little bit longer. We hope you will too, as we are going to await those first pictures of the crew coming out of this capsule coming your way in the next half an hour or so as we are continuing to stream. It is now 12:27 a.m. Eastern Time. We love that so many of you, our fellow weather science and technology nerds, have really come to enjoy watching live NASA human spaceflight right here on the Carolina Weather Group. There is a great intersection between the weekly show that we do about weather science, technology, and more, and spaceflight, because spaceflight involves so much of what we as weather nerds are primarily all about. And you know, the folks at NASA were watching the weather very carefully as they were planning the arrival of Crew-6 back here to Earth tonight. I would say those seas, as they described them earlier, are great for this type of thing. I don't know about you. I think I would be a little seasick bobbing up and down in that thing out there in the Atlantic Ocean. But of course, these are trained professionals who have just been orbiting for 6 months without gravity. We can see another one of the vessels now approaching. Again, these personnel, some of the assets here are going to take their time. They want to make sure that there aren't any toxic fumes still lingering on the outside of the capsule. Those do naturally form as a part of the re-entry process and then kind of should disappear here in the next few minutes. And you can actually see through these night vision images we're getting They are now beginning to climb aboard. Let's take a listen back into NASA TV coverage, see if we can get some of the radio communications from the crew inside.
Really moments after Dragon splashed down, we saw some of those fast boats rolling out to make sure that they were getting the crew as quickly as possible. Can you give us a sense of what it's taken to make sure the recovery vessels were here at this moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Our journey actually started several hours ago in Jacksonville. The MedOps teams and the recovery director boarded the first helicopter, and they were the first group to arrive on the ship about 4.5 hours before splashdown. So those medical teams took the time to get everything situated on the ship and ready to tend to the crew. And about 2 hours before splashdown, they deployed the fast boats into the water. I was actually on the second helicopter out, and we landed on the helicopter pad on top of the vessel about an hour before splashdown. And all of the teams have been hard at work since we touched down on the boat to get their various disciplines ready for Crew-6 to arrive home.
Excellent, Courtney. And last question before we let you go is we're seeing some of the recovery personnel on the Dragon capsule preparing for its eventual lift onto recovery vessel Megan. What can we expect to see in the next few moments?
Yeah, Gary, so once the crew is out
Copy. We
of
also
the
have you
capsule,
5x5.
they'll be
Boats are working on you
over to the
and
med
rigging
bay,
up the
where
vehicle.
the crew will
I'll get back
them
to you
checked out
closer
by
to
their
capsule
medical
lift.
teams, and we'll have the opportunity to take those spacesuits off and get comfortable back here on Earth. And then, of course, they'll run through those medical checks. They'll get back on the helicopter and head back to the airport where they'll board their planes back to Houston to begin their post-flight period. You're probably getting a better view than I am right now, so I'll let you walk through that. But back here on the ship, once the crew is off, they're not the only ones returning from space today. We'll actually stay here a little longer with the cargo team since there was International Space Station cargo returned on this flight. So once we get back to the airport, the cargo teams will begin doing cargo processing, taking photos of all of the articles that were included in the cargo, and they will pack all of that into box trucks that will take them back to various NASA centers. But Gary, an overall beautiful splashdown tonight, and I hope it was the same for you back in Hawthorne.
Absolutely, Courtney. We've been getting some fantastic views. Thank you so much for that report. That was Courtney Beasley out on the recovery ship, providing live coverage from the landing site just off the coast of Jacksonville. We're back in the action now, seeing some of the views from the recovery vessel and the recovery operations team, including helicopters, fast boats, jet skis, and of course, we're getting views from some of the ships that are standing by waiting to actually pull Dragon out of the water.
So at this point in time, the Dragon capsule has safed all of its systems. Mission Control did a systems check to make sure that that was true and accurate. They gave the fast approach teams the green light to approach and begin the rigging process, which is what we are now seeing underway. Additionally, they have recovered the parachutes from the water. So those were, we were able to see those being dragged onto a boat. And what we have now is there's one individual that we see kind of like a spider monkey crawling all around the capsule and attaching the necessary rigging, the straps. These are what will help to stabilize and lift the Dragon capsule out of the water and onto the recovery vessel. For tonight's operations, we are using our Atlantic Coast recovery vessel, Megan, and we, in probably like 30-ish minutes from now, it kind of varies depending on the sea states, which, as we can see, a little bit more waves than some other missions, but still well within the limits for recovery, really probably unfazing to the individuals that are out here doing the work as they train extensively for these operations, whether it's daytime or nighttime. So obviously we can see one person there working to secure that strap around the base of the service section of the Dragon capsule, and that is one of the primary stabilization strap rings that will help to lift the capsule out of the water and onto the Dragon's nest on board Megan.
And of course, the teams here are very close to the caps because we passed those hypergol checks, and it's safe around the vehicle. You see some of the personnel, of course, climbing on the outside, preparing the vehicle. You can actually see some of the tethers that are on the outside to allow it to be lifted onto the recovery vessel Megan. Some of our views are even getting better as the recovery ships that are providing some of the live views that we're seeing are getting closer to the Dragon Endeavour.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, this is one of the coolest but also frustrating moments of recovery for me personally, just because obviously for safety reasons, we have to station the recovery vessel and team a safe distance away from the intended splashdown target. It sounded like they were, according to Courtney, about 1.5 nautical miles away from the splashdown. But those fast boats are called fast boats for a reason. The primary recovery vessel, Megan, is not a fast boat, so it does take about 30 minutes for it to reach the capsule, essentially. So it's great because we see the views get closer and closer slowly, but just because I love to see the action as soon as possible, I wish it was a little bit closer, but that's just me.
It's great to get some of these thermal images. Of course, over on the East Coast, it's well past midnight, so very dark out there, but still getting some fantastic views. The recovery forces are not necessarily getting our views. You know, they don't have the thermal cameras. They're getting eyes on the vehicle.
This is what they're saying. This is an
precisely.
Actual visible spectrum.
Yes, with the visible spectrum, because of course the vehicle is being lit by spotlights, and you can see the fast boat itself has lights. So there's plenty of opportunities to make sure they have the capsule well within view, and all the teams that are surrounding in different recovery ships and different recovery vessels are aware of the capsule's presence. You can see some of the features of the Dragon capsule as the recovery forces outfit it with the rigging necessary to bring it onto recovery vessel Megan. Some of the circles you see in front of the individual that's on the Dragon capsule, that's where those parachutes were deployed from. Above that is the nose cone, which is, of course, closed prior to re-entry. It was open through the duration of most of the flight of Dragon to and from the International Space Station. It needed to remain open to perform that deorbit burn to, of course, successfully get home. But now it's closed, and you can see provided the protection necessary from the plasma buildup through the Dragon's re-entry. Some of the dark circles you see at the front of the vehicle, and by front I mean where that individual is on the capsule. The darker circles are some of the outlines of where those service section Dracos are, and the brighter white area is actually the base of the Super Draco engines, and these are inhibited once it gets into orbit, but are very much necessary through the launch phase. In the event of any abort that is necessary, it would be those Super Dracos that you're seeing, the bright white area, that would fire and provide enough thrust capability to escape a speeding Falcon 9 rocket.
Once again, we can see the recovery vessel Megan making its way closer and closer to the Dragon Endeavour capsule, which has splashed down off the Atlantic coast of Florida. We can see the recovery team in the fast boats that have now approached the Dragon capsule. They are in the process of rigging it up with the necessary straps and equipment that will be utilized for right there. That is the actual, the Dragon's nest that we will be lifting the Dragon capsule onto. The lifting mechanism, it's kind of hard to tell right now, but that almost house-like structure over the end of the aft end of the boat will actuate downward, and then the straps will be used to lift the Dragon capsule, and then the whole thing will actuate back into the orientation that we see it here to help secure, or to place it and to secure the Dragon capsule in that nest. After the capsule is placed in the nest, they will then just roll or translate the nest forward to where the platform is that we will actually be able to see the recovery team open the side hatch and eventually have Crew-6 egress or exit from the capsule. So if you look through the back there, you can see the capsule. That's that white speck in the background there in the darkness behind Megan.
Yeah, you can actually see the distance now. It's becoming much more clear. The space recovery vessel was designed very much with Dragon in mind. Of course, that hydraulic lift bringing it onto the Dragon's nest. And that platform, Kate, that you were describing, it allows for access right at the right spot, right in front of that side hatch. The side hatch will be facing right towards the camera. That will allow, when that Dragon nest comes in towards that platform, the crew on board recovery vessel Megan will have access to that side hatch to go ahead and open that. All 4 crew members will remain seated throughout that process, but the Dragon side hatch will be open, and the recovery teams will take the Crew-6 astronauts and cosmonaut out one at a time.
Yeah, you mentioned that this vessel had Dragon in mind. You couldn't be more correct. When SpaceX acquired this vessel, we actually have 2 of them, one for Atlantic operations, one for Gulf operations, and both of them are pretty identical. They all each have a lifting mechanism, a nest. We basically designed the interior and exterior of the vessel to accommodate efficient and speedy operations for Dragon recovery. In addition to these physical recovery assets, there are also medical bays where each crew member will get a quick medical checkout by the flight surgeon after egress, as well as a helicopter deck that in some instances is utilized to have the crew depart from there. So it is definitely a bespoke boat, if you will, a vessel for these Dragon recovery operations. And it's quite necessary because we want to make sure that these operations are as efficient as possible. We don't want to leave the crew in the water or in the capsule any longer than they need to be. So we really try to make sure that this is as efficient as possible. And certainly this vessel, both vessels, because like I said, they're pretty much mirror images for both Gulf and Atlantic coast operations. We make sure that they are as smooth as possible.
And we're just about 23 minutes from the time of splashdown. Again, that splashdown time, 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time, 9:17 p.m. Pacific. So we're already closing in on the vehicle. The recovery teams at this point, just to do a quick recap, have done initial checks of the spacecraft to make sure there was no hypergol leaks, any hazardous gases or materials, just to do a quick sniff check and make sure that the spacecraft was safe to approach. Once that was cleared, we saw some individuals on the Dragon capsule outfitting it with the rigging necessary for those straps you see on recovery vessel Megan. That hydraulic lift will bend forward and be attached to the Dragon capsule and be lifted off right onto that beautiful, perfectly Dragon-designed little disc you see on the Dragon nest. That's where Dragon will rest very comfortably to allow access to the crew. So that has happened over the past 24 minutes or so. And we are making great progress right on the timeline for the recovery ship to arrive.
Dragon, SpaceX, be advised, we're transitioning the forward link over to the recovery vessel. Comm will be unavailable for approximately 5 minutes.
SpaceX Dragon top.
I believe that's space code for Speak Now or Forever Hold Your Peace. You're continuing to watch live coverage of the return of NASA SpaceX Crew-6 to Earth following 6 months aboard the International Space Station. I'm James Brierton from the Carolina Weather Group, streaming to you from Charlotte on the Carolina Weather Group YouTube and on WCNC+. We're going to continue to stay with these live pictures, and I wanted to invite you all that if you got a chance to see the capsule fly over Florida or any other part of the coastal United States, you can tag us on Facebook at Carolina Weather Group or on Twitter at Carolina WX Group. I know I still called it Twitter. I'm sorry. Don't tell Elon. And we are going to continue to watch these live pictures coming to us right now off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida, where 2 American astronauts, one from the United Arab Emirates and one Russian cosmonaut, are anxiously awaiting to be hoisted up onto that SpaceX boat that you see right there on the foreground. And then we will get the door open. We will see their smiling faces, and we will see them exit the capsule by the aid of medical staff. Medical staff will be there to help them and essentially put them into rolling gurneys or wheelchairs, whatever you want to call them. And that's standard procedure, just because despite the fact that these astronauts do as much as they can while they're in zero-G to keep their muscle tone and their bodies functioning for a return to Earth, they are going to need some time to adjust. And as you heard them talking about a few moments ago, there'll also be some cargo on board that officials will be taking and cataloging as well too. So I'm not sure we're going to get a chance to necessarily see that, but I do know that we will be able to see the disembarking of those 4 astronauts from that capsule here in the next few minutes. I'm James Brierton. Thanks for watching with us. Let's take you back now to NASA TV coverage.
As smaller fish, and so we might actually see some dolphins as we have in the past. Sometimes they come out because the hunting is maybe a little easier with them attracted to the water surface with all the light. Obviously, we need lots of light to ensure safe operations as we're progressing through these recovery steps.
So you can see one of the rigging equipment was thrown to the fast boat, now attached to Dragon. Again, this is on a hydraulic lift that will safely lift the Dragon capsule out of the water and onto that disc you see at the bottom of your screen. The recovery forces here have trained time and time again for this operation, have a good sense of what to do in this particular scenario. This is one of the better case scenarios for Dragon. We talked about it landing in a stable 1 configuration. That would be lifting the capsule off when it's upright. There are different configurations that the crews are trained to accommodate.
As we mentioned before, the Dragon capsule is soon to be lifted onto the recovery vessel Megan. It will then, once it's in the Dragon's nest there that we can see on screen, it'll be pulled forward to the recovery platform, which is currently off screen, but we'll get a view of that later on whenever Dragon is in place. The crew will egress. They will...
Dragon, SpaceX, forward link transition complete. Com check.
SpaceX Dragon, heavy line clear.
Glad to hear from you. An update, the recovery vessel is backing up to the ship now, maybe 50 meters away, and looking for your go to come on board with internal cameras.
SpaceX Dragon, come on board.
Copy.
At this point in time, rough estimation for crew egress is anywhere between 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how additional safety checks pan out and how quickly we can get the team, the capsule onto the recovery vessel that you see there. Those teams are now preparing to lower that hydraulic lift mechanism into the water. That will then bring the spacecraft onto the deck into that translation system known as the nest. The capsule will remain there during crew extraction, as well as throughout the journey back to port.
Keep these live pictures for you full screen. James Brierton here with you as we are watching crews begin to hoist this Dragon capsule onto the back of this SpaceX ship. You can see the arms now coming down. It's going to pluck it up out of the water, lift it back up on those cables, and then lower it down into that circular foam, if you will, that you see in the center of your screen. We'll watch that kind of transpire here in the course of the next few minutes. And I wanted to take a moment to kind of remark on the fact what an incredible 6 months this has been. I feel like a part of this mission as a big fan, as a loyalist, and as somebody who is responsible for spreading some of the excitement about space flight ever since I was honored by NASA Kennedy Space Center to be invited down for the NASA social event that was featured around the launch of this crew some 6 months ago. If you feel that you have a strong desire to learn more about space, or maybe you're already a diehard space fan, you can keep an eye on NASA's social accounts for invites to apply to these NASA events. They look for content creators and influencers. They really truly are open to anyone. I had a great opportunity on my trip to meet so many folks, and we had some advanced space nerds and some novice, and NASA looks really to complement their busload of peeps, as we called them, by really bringing in a great mix of people, both domestically and internationally, as well, I guess primarily, I do think you had to be a United States citizen, if I'm not mistaken, to qualify, but you can check out all the rules and regulations. And ooh, that guy just jumped right into the water there. I did like how NASA TV called them spider monkeys as they've been crawling up and around this capsule. They also did comment on the thought I had earlier, which is that the waves are a bit more touchy than they probably would have liked, but jumping into the water is part of this operation, as we can now see this capsule being lifted up, this Dragon capsule. As I mentioned before, these things are reused. That's one of the really strong selling points of SpaceX when they partnered with NASA, and when we discontinued the space shuttle program, was all about reusing a lot of these spacecraft and a lot of the rockets and a lot of the boosters, which are famously landing themselves following the launch of these Falcon 9 rockets. So this spacecraft will hopefully be reused as it has already, and it still has those 4 astronauts inside it right now as it's swinging back and forth. I really have to wonder, and I guess if I ever get a chance to ask an astronaut more questions, what is more seasickening, flying through space, sitting in the waves, or being hoisted up? Because that is quite a lot of movement. So as you can see, they are about to touch down on the vessel here out in the Atlantic Ocean, and we will slowly, everything is done with precision, see this be met by a platform, and that door, that capsule right there on the side, will eventually open up, and we'll see our 4 Crew-6 astronauts returning. I was at Kennedy Space Center waving goodbye to them as they headed out to the rocket, and it'll be great to see them back here on Earth, smiling in just a few minutes. We now have pictures from inside the capsule. The cabin lights are turned down, but you can see the touchscreen controls are on, the visors are still on, and we will actually hopefully be able to get a glimpse inside here in just a few moments, maybe facing the other direction, because they are going to be disembarking from this angle, essentially forward out that side hatch that we can see on the right-hand side of your screen. So please continue the conversation with me. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm in the chat room, and we are going to continue to listen into this NASA TV coverage as we are slowly making our way towards 1 o'clock Eastern time here in the United States. I'm James Brierton. This is live coverage of the return of NASA's SpaceX Crew-6, streaming your way from the Carolina Weather Group and on WCNC+.
Dragon, I'm happy to see you safe and sound on board. Personnel are completing their final checks. Stand by for translation across the deck to the egress platform.
SpaceX Dragon copies. We'll be waiting.
And that translation that was mentioned is a physical movement of the Dragon nest, the view you're seeing now. The capsule itself will be moved further inwards into the recovery vessel, where there is a platform waiting. And you can sort of see in the middle of your view of Dragon, there is that nice square feature. That is the side hatch. When the Dragon nest moves into the recovery vessel towards that platform, it allows the recovery teams that are on that platform to perform the operations of opening the hatch. The teams you've seen so far have been responsible for the rigging and the operation of the hydraulic lift to bring the Dragon capsule onto the Dragon nest. Now they'll hand it over to the teams that will get the Crew-6 astronaut and cosmonaut safely out of the capsule.
Yeah, it's important to note that all 4 crew members will be getting assistance from the recovery teams while they exit the capsule. It's the same process for any returning crew from a long duration mission. And it makes sense because returning to, our environment here with gravity can really wreak havoc on our bodily systems and especially those that are responsible for balance and control. So we will be providing assistance, but I'm sure we will be seeing smiles and thumbs up along the way.
Yeah, that's one of the main reasons. Of course, we've been talking a lot about the operations, but really we should mention the science. Of course, the reason the Dragon is returning from space is because their mission, the Crew-6 astronauts and cosmonauts, was a 6-month expedition on board the International Space Station, an orbiting laboratory for science, maintenance, technology demonstrations. It's the lab that allows gravity to be taken out of the equation, and you can find some new and interesting things about many different parts of science: physical science, biological sciences, and of course human sciences. You can learn a lot about the human body, and that's very necessary for learning how humans adapt to space and, of course, returning from space to a one-gravity environment. Very necessary for understanding how to send humans further into the solar system, to the moon and to Mars.
So we're now standing by for translation of the Dragon capsule to the recovery platform. Basically meaning that once everything checks out here, we should see the entire capsule move towards us. We'll get a different camera view on board the recovery vessel once the Dragon capsule starts to move, but it'll basically put it right up next to the platform that is basically right at the same height as the bottom of the side hatch. Oh, there we have our first movement of Dragon Endeavour making its way to that recovery platform.
Dragon, I'm noticing the cabin lights are off. I'm wondering if you had them off specifically for re-entry.
SpaceX Dragon, we did, and you turned them on us. We were enjoying the nice calm lighting. Wait, turn the back off again. Good. We're enjoying the lighting. We have to see what's going on outside this way.
No worries on the lighting. Fine with the lights off. I imagine your re-entry was pretty amazing. Side hatch opening should be any minute now, and I think that's about it for me working with y'all tonight. It's great to see you back. Steve, Woody, Sultan, Andrey, happy to have you back home safe.
And we're happy to be back, and we look forward to catching up with you again real soon. Take care.
You've all been on a flight, I imagine, where they turned the cabin lights on you and woke you up. So I'm kind of surprised Mission Control didn't do that. We will continue to monitor these live pictures. We won't miss the moment that they disembark for the first time as we await for the opening of that hatch. Wanted to show you some of these amazing videos that you guys have been tagging us in, showing us the return of this Dragon capsule over the course of Florida in the last 30-40 minutes ago at this point. Take a look at this video here real fast that Tammy sent us. This is amazing. Take a listen.
Dragon, welcome home. Oh my God, this is so cool.
It really is so cool. So for so many people who got to see the site just like this, we thank Tammy for becoming a fan of the Carolina Weather Group and sharing this video for us. It really does look like a shooting star or a fireball. Absolutely amazing. This is the view she had as it came over Florida about an hour or so ago, as we are now waiting for those 4 astronauts, 2 American, 1 from the United Arab Emirates, and 1 from Russia to come out of their SpaceX Dragon capsule here in just moments. As you saw live, it got hoisted up onto that vessel, that boat, and we're going to see them with the assistance of some medical personnel and some officials come back out of their vessel here in the next few minutes. Coming up on 1 o'clock Eastern time, this is live coverage on the Carolina Weather Group and WCNZ+. Take you back now to NASA TV.
Thumbs up scan of all 4 crew members to make sure everything is good. But what we're doing right now on the outside of the capsule, we're doing additional safety checks. We saw momentarily some of the recovery team, they had face masks on. This is personal protective equipment, or PPE. It's basically a respirator to allow them to breathe clean air. They're just going to do some additional sniff tests for any lingering hypergol vapors. Once again, the onboard propellants that we use, nitrogen tetroxide and monomethylhydrazine, are toxic if we come into contact with them or we breathe those vapors. So just that, once again, ensuring full safety for the recovery team on board, as well as the crew as we prepare to open that side hatch. We want to make sure that none of those vapors are lingering.
Side hatch, if we get these views from the inside, we'll also be able to alternate from the outside, is now open. You see the recovery team is open and waving to the crew. First humans that the Crew-6 has seen on the ground in 6 months.
Looks like we got some fist bump action, thumbs up. Seems like the crew is in pretty good spirits after their journey back home.
We're not getting audio, but I am getting reports that on the recovery ship there was a big round of applause from all the recovery team on recovery vessel Megan as soon as that side hatch opened for the crew, congratulating them on a successful mission and successful return home.
So once again, this is the first time that the side hatch has been opened since the day that the crew lifted off from pad 39A. This side hatch is not utilized while they are on station. We use the forward hatch, or the hatch located at the top of the Dragon capsule, for ingress and egress to the space station. So this is the first time that the side hatch is open, and like you said, Gary, their first breath of fresh air since their departure. So we'll also see the SpaceX recovery team, perhaps they already installed it, but I think they did. It's a protective casing around the side hatch. As we mentioned before, we do reuse these capsules. This is actually the 4th flight for this particular capsule. So to help make sure that we protect the hardware as well as the spacesuits themselves, we want to make sure that that side hatch has a little bit of protection. So there's a small piece that they put around the edge to help protect it. Looks like we're getting some initial photos of the crew's return while continuing to secure that side hatch. Make sure it stays in the upright position while the crew is making their way out. Again, we will be providing assistance to all 4 crew members as they egress, as returning to our 1G environment, our 1 gravity environment here on Earth can be difficult after spending so many months in space. Once again, this crew lifted off in very early March, so they've certainly been enjoying microgravity for a while.
It's Important to note all the team members it takes to perform a successful recovery operations. We have specialized personnel out to drive the fast boats and secure rigging equipment, operate the hydraulic lift to bring Dragon onto the Dragon's nest and move it into position. Now we have specialists that are dedicated to understanding the Dragon's systems, successfully opening up the side hatch and knowing the insides of the Dragon vehicle to basically unfasten, unbuckle the 4 crew members from the vehicle and start bringing them out one at a time. We, of course, have medical personnel on board, with medical facilities on board as well, to provide standard checks and test the health of the crew, make sure they're feeling good. And then, of course, Kate, you mentioned there is a helipad on the recovery vessel itself and a helicopter stage. So after the initial medical checks, the crew will be able to get a very quick ride home to the Florida coast, where they'll hop on a plane and make their way back over to Houston for further testing and, of course, to see their families, who will be eagerly awaiting their arrival.
Had another question come into our YouTube chat. Dan, the breaking news man, wants to know, how many times can a SpaceX Dragon capsule be reused? Well, according to SpaceX, it could be reused up to 15 times, but we haven't had enough missions yet to see whether or not that's true. If you have questions or comments, join our live chat on YouTube as we continue to watch live here on the Carolina Weather Group and WCNC+. That side capsule is, that door is now open, and you can see that in the next few minutes, we'll be getting these astronauts out of their seats. I'm sure they're anxious. They've been in those seats for 17 hours. I'm James Brierton. Thanks for chatting along with me. We take it back over now to NASA TV.
Time critical cargo can be recovered from the spacecraft. They're positioned right underneath the crew members, and they can be brought back into port relatively quickly. Once the ship and capsule return to shore, the recovery team will perform additional inspections before loading Dragon onto a flatbed truck at the SpaceX facility in Cape Canaveral for post-processing.
As part of the effort to make sure that there's a bit more room for crew egress within the capsule, we are currently detaching and removing the footrests that we saw attached to each of the 4 seats inside Dragon. This just helps to create a little bit more space and enable the crew to get out a little bit easier. We'll also likely see them put a small slide up against the side hatch, and that will allow the crew to kind of slide out a little bit to egress a bit easier. Yep, there's that slide.
It's like they've done this before.
Yeah, we've done it just a few times. We're now standing by for egress of the Crew-6 team. Very happy to see Steve, Woody, Andrey, and Sultan back on planet Earth. I'm sure they are also excited to come out, and as you mentioned, it's after the medical checks, they'll hop in the helicopter and go home, a quick ride. So I bet they're all getting really excited for the opportunity to see their families really soon.
And of course, the change of gravity from microgravity to 1G can be taxing on the body. So throughout that whole process, through the medical checks, through the helicopter ride, the plane ride, the crew will have facilities and will have the ability to rest through much of that journey. As, of course, this has been a taxing journey for them, and they'll have well-deserved rest along their journey back home to Houston.
varies mission to mission, crew by crew, but we usually see either the pilot or the commander egress first. So with this view here, Commander Steve Bowen is in that left seat, and pilot Woody Hoburg is in the seat on the right. To Woody's right is Andrey Fedyaev, and to Steve's left is Sultan Alneyadi. So usually it makes it easier if the center seats are vacated prior to the 2 mission specialist seats, but it really varies crew to crew. We did see them detach and remove the footrests from all 4 seats to also help add a bit more moving room within the interior of the capsule.
There's a series of checks, so it's not as easy as just unbuckling and getting out of your seat. The seats, of course, and suits are designed with human spaceflight in mind. So the seats are connected. The suits are connected to the seats via umbilical that can provide communications as well as air, nitrox purge that the crew is able to breathe. It's a little bit more oxygen than your standard breathing air. And so there is some technical specifics to get them egressed. So it is quite a process. So we're just standing by for them to get out of their seats. Does look like Steve will be the first out. NASA astronaut Steve Bowen, the first to exit the Dragon spacecraft.
I think I see a big smile on his face.
Helped up by the recovery teams.
Now being seated in a rolling chair to help move him back to the medical bay, where he will get a quick checkout with the flight surgeon.
And again, this is standard procedure.
We can see some applause happening on deck. Looks like our pilot, Woody Hoburg, will be the next to egress. For those of you that have just joined us, we are now standing by for egress of the remaining 3 Crew-6 members. We can now see Woody Hoburg making his way, pilot of Crew-6, making his way down the slide. Looks like some excitement, possibly some more applause happening off camera. Remaining inside are mission specialists Sultan Alneyadi and Andrey Fedyaev. Commander Steve Bowen has already egressed. Some more applause there on the deck of the recovery vessel. Dragon Splashdown just under an hour ago at 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern. So just under an hour ago, they made contact with the ocean surface, and here we see them now egressing and beginning the last steps before being able to make their way home.
That's right. The 2 NASA astronauts have exited the Dragon spacecraft and are now in the medical facilities as part of the standard procedures and checks necessary before they board the helicopters and take the flight back to shore. Of course, there are the two mission specialists left in the capsule. If they follow standard procedure, it should be Andrey Fedyaev that we see egress the capsule next.
Gary, you mentioned standard procedure. I think that's an important thing to note, that in addition to the teams rehearsing both joint operations, everywhere from pre-flight training to the things that they were doing in space to the things that they were monitoring while Dragon was on orbit and making its way home, everything is very carefully choreographed in terms of the process in which we execute these operations. So even from a recovery standpoint, you mentioned before that our recovery times from the first time we did this with humans on Demo 2, again using this same capsule. This capsule has flown 4 times now. Our operations have gotten more efficient, and they are documented step by step. And so, of course, whenever it comes to egress, there is a little bit of flexibility that if a crew member needs or wants to egress sooner than later, we can do that. But generally, as I mentioned before, we do try to vacate the 2 center seats first. We can now see 2 more leg rests being removed footrests being removed from the seats inside the capsule, again, just to create a little bit more room.
Yeah, you mentioned the efficiencies, Kate. We're inside of an hour now, and this is from the moment of splashdown at 12:17 p.m. Eastern. It's now 1:14, or 12:17 a.m. Eastern, rather. So it's now 1:14 a.m. Eastern, and we're seeing the 3rd crew member egress. So we're just an hour, really, after splashing down that the crew is able to set foot on the recovery vessel. There's Roscosmos cosmonaut Andrey Fedyaev being assisted by the recovery teams onto the rolling chair. He'll also be positioned over to the medical facilities. Last remaining crew member inside Dragon Endeavour now is Emirati astronaut Sultan Alneyadi, completing 186 days in space.
Got some happy waves there from Andrey. More applause. And the last footrest being detached from Sultan Alneyadi's chair.
You can see SpaceX and Emirati recovery personnel positioned outside the Dragon capsule, ready to receive Sultan Alneyadi. Again, he is the last remaining crew member inside Dragon Endeavour.
And if he makes it out in the next minute, which it looks like he is, it will be exactly 1 hour on the dot after making splashdown.
Not bad.
60 minutes exactly. So once again, nominal operations are to assist all crew members to the medical bay. The return to gravity can be pretty jarring on the human body. So we slide them down a little Dragon fun slide, assist them into the wheeled chair, and roll them over to the medical bay. And just like that, the 4th crew member 1 hour exactly on the nose since splashdown, has now egressed from Dragon Endeavour. Looks like smiles and waves and applause all around.
All right. All 4 crew members have egressed Dragon successfully. So now that Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey are safely back home on Earth and getting checked out by the NASA medical teams and, of course, the international teams, we're going to wrap up our live coverage of their return. This all kicked off on March 2nd, 2023 from his...
And as they prepare to wrap up their coverage, I suppose I will do the same. It's been a pleasure speaking with so many of you in the chat on the Carolina Weather Group YouTube channel and knowing so many of you who have been watching along with us on the WCNC streaming platform. I'm James Brierton in Charlotte. Again, special thanks to all those watching and to NASA who really, I mean, it was a true honor to be selected. Again, here is my credential from the NASA social event earlier this year. We got to go down to Kennedy Space Center and see so much of what happens there at that spaceport to prepare for flights like this one and for the ones to come with Artemis, which will return humans to the moon in the years ahead. Artemis 2 is training now. They will orbit the moon, hopefully by the end of 2024, and then Artemis 3 will bring astronauts back onto the surface of the moon. It's going to be an amazing time to be a space fan. So I'm so glad you are here with us. And hey, don't forget to share this with some of your friends. So hopefully they will get into the space fun as well too. It's been a pleasure getting to know some of you and to chat with some of you. I hope we will see you again on our weekly show, the Carolina Weather Group, where we discuss weather, science, technology, and more. This mission might be over, but there are so many more missions to come in the months and years ahead. So please do like and subscribe wherever you're watching from. For now, from Charlotte, I'm James Brierton. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye.
And prepared Dragon Endeavour for its lift onto the recovery vessel. And just almost exactly an hour following splashdown, we saw Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey make their way out of Dragon and into the recovery ship's medical facilities, safe and sound.
So after the medical facilities and medical checks, they'll catch a helicopter flight back to shore where they'll transfer to the aircraft that will take them home. Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey will take a NASA plane for the short flight back to Houston, and later Andrey will fly back to Russia and Sultan to the UAE. They'll be reunited with families to bring an end to the mission. It's been an honor and a privilege to share their journey with all of you as we continue in this new era of human spaceflight.
Return today marks the end of the direct handover that we just executed after successfully launching the the Crew-7 mission to the space station just a little over. It has been an incredible honor and joy to share. All the teams from SpaceX and NASA continue to work hard to keep America leading the world in human spaceflight. Continue to follow SpaceX and NASA online and on social media for updates for the very latest on crew and cargo flights to and from the International Space Station.
And we'll continue to share the progress of Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey on social media as they travel back home. We also have a post-splashdown media telecon coming up at approximately 11 p.m. Pacific, 2 a.m. Eastern, where leadership from NASA, the UAE, SpaceX will share a final update as we conclude this successful mission. So we'll say thank you one more time for tuning in and cheering on Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey as they made their return back to planet Earth. From all of us at NASA and SpaceX, welcome home, Crew-6. So long.
And let you guys see what it is that I'm experiencing.
Trying to get a direct measurement with a handheld kestrel anemometer here. We'll see what we can pick up, but and there goes change.
When a tornado-warned cell came through the neighborhood and it brought down several large pines, just like the one you're seeing right here behind me. To give you a sense of what the aftermath of storm damage smells like, it smells very heavily of pine and also sounds like chainsaws. We have another tree down here. This one just barely missing this brick home.
I mean, this is incredible. Let me turn the camera around. Get us back into kind of a dry view.
And I get up here, and all of a sudden the storm surge started. And all of a sudden, I ended up with about 4 feet of water.
I'm Scotty Powell here reporting just outside of Sparta, North Carolina, where you've seen a lot of the earthquake damage. Again, a 5.1 magnitude earthquake rocked Sparta, North Carolina earlier this morning, just after 8 a.m. The
if you go look at the footing of that, you'll see where it was a twist. Very severe wind that caused destruction.
From Gaston County to back here in Mecklenburg County, those were just 2 of the tornado warnings that were issued here for the greater Charlotte area.
I'm not one for hyperbole, but it's countless at this point. There's trees on houses, there's a lot of roads that are blocked. We're just trying to get cleaned up so people can get through.
Have you ever seen the Dan River like this before?
No, not that I can recall. I mean, I've seen it fairly flooded before, but I've never seen it to where we're now kind of asking ourselves, okay, a couple more feet and it might get over those bridges.